Operation Gladio meets secret societies, and we are here with War Hamster Brady. How are you today?
I'm doing really well. We're about 2 weeks into a turbocharged health kick, and I'm full of energy and vigor.
Awesome. I don't know if I can stand you and more energetic.
I'll see if I can calm it down just a wee bit. So today's gonna be a fun show. I have not told the Colonel any details about what we're going to talk about today, because, and the same goes for next week. I'm going to hint at what's going on next week because it's going to be very related, but we're going to hit some really important topics, and they're related to the overall theory that we've been talking about for, 3 years. And that's basically that a small group of elite families, corporations, etc., have been placing their people throughout all the important institutions, whether it be foreign policy, regular civilian government, military, intelligence, the corporate world, and all the institutions, including the universities, and all these key chokehold positions. So basically, they can manipulate American foreign policy for the benefit of the multinational corporations. Sound about right?
Yes.
We really, we started out, going into some of the origins of the intelligence, CIA, etc., Operation Gladio, which is the Colonel's specialty. We kind of jumped over to secret societies, and we did many, many weeks on Skull and Bones, and we are most recently talking about Scroll and Key, and it's taken a little longer than I expected to get through Scroll and Key, because Skull and Bones, we made the case that they are very nefarious. It's not just it's not just a fraternal organization where you do a little bit of networking. It's quite obvious that there's a lot more going on there. Scroll and Key started out as more academic, and it seemed much more innocent, but we've gone through the years. We just finished up in the 1890s. We're starting to see some of the same connections we saw with Skull and Bones. And whether it be networking or worse, we're going to jump into some really important stuff and how our country and this world really runs. So with no further ado, I am going to share my screen. All right, Scroll and Key, Yale University. And we've been going through, there's their tomb. We've been going through, the founders, the 1850s, 70s, 1880s, 90s, and now we're in the 1900s. And the first two guys we see are a couple of brothers from the McCormick family. You have Joseph Medill McCormick, class of 1900, and Robert Rutherford Colonel McCormick, Colonel McCormick, class of 1903. Now, are you familiar with the McCormick dynasty?
Yes, I ran across them a couple of times, not intimately familiar with them.
Yeah, you're going to be blown away with some of the connections, and it's going to tie into some of our other other themes. So, with no further ado, I'm going to jet on over here across the screen. I'm getting better at driving this thing.
I see.
Oh, somewhat better. All right, this is the McCormick family tree. That's interesting. I use a number of different websites for this family tree stuff, and this one's from Genianet, as in genealogy. And even this isn't perfect because they got they've got this guy marrying his daughter, so that's really not too cool. But anyway, good information. So let's go through the McCormick family. I'll just leave it here for now because we don't have any good pictures yet. All right, we got two brothers, Joseph Medill and Robert Rutherford McCormick. We'll get into them later because I want to go to the origins of the family. And they are Scots-Irish descent. They settled in Virginia and would eventually migrate to Chicago, Illinois. Now, before I did this, our good friend Ghost to Base Patrick Henry, whose name, he publicly now uses his name as Gordon McCormick, and he's from Virginia. So I texted him, like, are you related to this family at all? And he goes, no. I go, good, because I'm going to be ripping on him a little bit. He goes, go for it. Not my family. So I thought that was funny. All right, the first two to get there was a Thomas McCormick, 1702 to 1762. And his wife, he would His wife, Elizabeth Caruth, would get there in the 1700s. Their first son is a Robert McCormick. Anytime you see this arrow, that means that somebody married him. And if you see a line going down, that means they're direct lineage. So that's how you decipher how I'm doing this. And I wish the lines were a little thicker, but you should be able to see them.
We can see them.
Okay. So next is Robert McCormick. And there'll be a lot more Roberts. There's 1738 to, I'm not sure if I have that year right here, but yeah, that looks right by 1818. And he married a Martha Sanderson McCormick. And they have 6 children. Oh, Robert is a Revolutionary War veteran. So good on him. He's about the right age, 1738. He would have been about 40 years old. And of their children, there was a George McCormick, a Martha McCormick, an Elizabeth McCormick, a William McCormick, then a James McCormick, and finally, the youngest actually deserves a Wikipedia entry and have a picture. And this is one Robert McCormick Jr., the youngest child. Born 1780 in Rockbridge County, Virginia, and he marries a Mary Ann Hall. They would have 8 children who helped out on the farm, and that's these lines below there. We'll get to them. He's a farmer. He runs a mill, and they got a shop on this farm, so he's a pretty industrial guy. Yeah. He's also an inventor, and he makes small gadgets around the farm. Got his first patent was something called a hemp brake, which is a device for breaking hemp and flax. I'm not going to try to demonstrate it. I read about it. He makes a threshing machine, a clover sheller of stone, a blacksmith bellows, and a hillside plow. But he really made his name by creating something known as a reaper. You know, a reaper, if anybody's been a farmer, you know what a reaper is. It cuts and gathers grasses like wheat at harvest. It makes it a lot easier. So I think I got a picture of it right here. This is a 19th century reaper pulled by horses. Got it?
Yeah.
So remember, this is 1830. We're about ready to expand west. And a lot of new states and territories are farming territory. So this is, his invention is a big opportunity. So, it's interestingly enough, in 2002, Robert Jr. and 3 of his sons actually had a type of wheat named after them called the McCormick, some kind of McCormick wheat. So let's look at his sons. First thing we're going to do is Cyrus McCormick. Cyrus Hall McCormick took his mother's maiden name as his middle name, as was a tradition. Cyrus is a bit of a genius. He's an inventor and a businessman. He's born in Virginia. He takes his father's invention and improves it in less than 18 months. And the McCormick harvester gets patented in 1834. And really the difference between that and all the previous harvesters is it's pulled by horses instead of being pushed. And that really was the big scientific achievement. So they decide to start selling this to the public. And sales are slow for about a decade. All the machines are built manually and by hand in the family farm shop. So for example, in 1842, they sold 7. In 1843, they sold 29. In 1844, they sold 50 of these. He gets his second patent in 1845, and he builds a factory. He finds a factory in a place called Brookport, New York, so he could mass produce these. 1847, their father passes away, and he moves the business to Chicago. And that's where we got the Chicago McCormicks. Him and his brother Leander moved to Chicago. And we'll get to Leander here in a second. Where is Leander? He's way over here. Say hi, Leander. All these bubbles with just the names of the siblings, it means they didn't really do anything of note. Okay. So they built their own factory in Chicago. Now, at the time, throughout the Midwest, Chicago was a pretty new town and less established than places like Cleveland, St. Louis, Milwaukee. But what Chicago had was better water access to the Great Lakes and the whole canal system. And the railroad was starting to go through with all the connections to the west, where all the farmland's going to be. So there was a very strategic move to Chicago. Remember we decided to call this show The Political Machine?
Mm-hmm.
You've heard about the Chicago machine?
Yes.
Yeah, we're going to get into that a little bit. Remember, this is the time leading up prior to the Civil War. So there's another guy, a couple other people that had patented harvesters, or reapers, I should say. And one is a guy named Hussey, and another was a guy by the name of John Henry Manny. And there were legal issues over who had the right patent. This goes back to 1831. They've been going back and forth in and out of courts. So the famous trial in 1855, the McCormicks go to trial with John Henry Manny, a guy from Rockford, Illinois, and they were going to sue him for $400,000 and to get him to stop producing his reapers. What had just happened is the Manny Reaper went over to the Paris Exposition of 1855 and actually beat the McCormick Reaper, as it was a better performing Reaper. So McCormick sees this, files a suit for patent infringement. So Cyrus McCormick, who's now running the family business, this is big bucks. He hires the former U.S. Attorney General, Reverdy Johnson, and a New York patent attorney, Edward Dickerson, to represent him. This guy, Manny, hires George Harding and Edward Stanton. Because these guys are from out of state, they decide to hire a local lawyer from Illinois. You might have heard of his name is Abraham Lincoln. This court goes all the way to the Supreme Court, and Manny wins. That may have been political, as we'll see. But it doesn't take McCormick out of business. He's producing 4,000 reapers a year, and the family's getting very wealthy. 1861, Hussey's patents extended. McCormick's was not. Probably had something to do with the fact that McCormick was very outspoken in his opposition to a guy by the name of Abraham Lincoln, and his criticism of the Republican Party probably hurt his cause. Now, what's going on in the 1850s and 60s is the Whig Party's disappearing. The Democrat Party is split between the Southern and Northern, and there's this brand new party coming out called the Republican Party, and it's dominated by these people called the Radical Republicans. Radical Republicans were the left-wingers of the 1840s and 50s. They wanted bigger government. They wanted internal improvements. When I say internal improvements, same thing Hamilton and Lincoln said, and they want protective tariffs. This is crony capitalism. This is mercantilism. When you have the federal government paying for improvements, they give out the contracts to their buddies, whoever helped them get elected. It's called the spoil system. And that's why you got these bundlers that help get their preferred candidates elected, because they know they're going to get paid back 10 times over. And in this case, the internal improvements are obviously the railroad, and who had federal land grants and all that. So that's what the Radical Republicans are, but they're worse than that. They're radical about everything. A lot of them, and I'm not going to get into any kind of theological discussion, they started in Allegheny County, New York, which of course is known for steel. And then they shifted to the Midwest. There's a group called the Kentucky Colony, I think it's called, that ended up basically starting organized crime in the Midwest. It was an absolute crime ring, and they were all affiliated with the Radical Republicans. They are Lincoln's biggest supporters, and we'll talk more about that. The other thing about the evangelical side is most of them are Unitarian, and without getting all theological, they don't believe in the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. The Unitarians believe in basically it's an equality of all men, but they're also abolitionists. And everyone goes, well, that sounds like a great thing. They sponsored this thing called the Free Soil. And everyone goes, yeah, these new territories, we're going to be free of slavery. But that's not what these guys meant. They wanted all the new states to be free of black people altogether, whether they're slaves or free. And you see that in Lincoln's writing throughout the 1850s. Even early in his presidency, he didn't know what to do with the quote-unquote black problem. So that's who we're dealing with. And they're very vindictive and vengeful politically. So McCormick's been a lifelong Democrat and decides he goes to Congress to try to protect his patent, but nothing is done due to the politics. And basically, Cyrus is of the opinion the South could never lose the war, so he spent most of the Civil War vacationing in Europe. Comes back in 1864, tries to run for Congress unsuccessfully on a Peace Now platform. He would continue his political efforts, even though Chicago is a very Republican town. Wait a minute, Chicago? Yeah. So what's Cyrus's politics all about? He pushes for efforts to annex the Dominican Republic as a U.S. territory. A lot of what we've talked about has been about American imperialism, right?
Yep.
Have I made the argument to you that America became an empire in 1860, 1861?
Yes.
Yeah, when we invaded a sovereign nation called the Confederate States. And this is part of that mentality. America is a young, fledgling superpower. You got a rising Japan. You got Europe fighting all these things. We now are modern, and we want to get a piece of the pie too. That is the mentality throughout the industrial Northwest and Midwest. So Cyrus would serve on several Illinois Democratic Party Central Committee. He proposes ready for this? Famous proposal. Sit down. An international mechanism to control food production and distribution. That's straight out of the Technocracy Handbook, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and just to put that in context, this is a guy who makes machinery. I mean, in the Gladio period that we study, that was International Harvester with the Rockefellers down in Latin America. So the analogies and patterns, you're going back farther, obviously, than we normally do, but it's the exact same. They're looking for markets to put their industrial capability in order to enrich themselves, and they don't care about the people that they displace to do it.
You have any idea how much fun I have doing shows with you? You want to know what you just did?
What?
The McCormick Reaper Company
Yes.
in 1902 would merge with another one. We're going to get to that and create a company known as International Harvester.
I know.
This is the guy.
Yep.
Brilliant. All right, so a little bit more on Cyrus because he's important. Donates $10,000 to help a guy named Dwight Moody start the YMCA chapter in Chicago.
And what was the YMCA for?
It's Young Men's Christian Association, but it evolved into much more than that.
Yes.
Yeah. And Moody, again, is a Unitarian. And I'm not going to get into holy war with anybody over the Trinity versus Unitarians. Okay, so I'm stating historical facts. I do not do theology because I don't know it well enough, because I'm a very young Christian. I don't know it well enough to debate anybody. Let's see, 1871, the Great Chicago Fire burns the factory down. They build it right back up by 1873. By 1879, his brother Leander would change the company's name from Cyrus H. McCormick and Brothers to the McCormick Harvesting Machine Company. And Cyrus is a bit annoyed because it kind of lessened his contributions. All right. So Cyrus marries Nettie Fowler. She's known as a big philanthropist. They have 7 children. Oops. First one, very important. Actually, you know what? Let's do the brothers first. And now go in the order I have it. Cyrus McCormick Jr. Handsome lad. 1859 to 1936, he became the president of the McCormick Harvesting Machine from 1884 to 1902. This is the one who would merge with Deering Harvester to create International Harvester, which was financed by J.P. Morgan. And Cyrus is considered a brilliant negotiator. It's valued at $150 million, $5.4 billion today. And I changed my mind on the order I want to do this, so bear with me. I just want to talk a little bit about William Sanderson McCormick. Born in 1815, dies in 1865, a relatively young man. Born in Virginia, he's a businessman and inventor. When the brothers, when the financial panic of 1837, the farm had a lot of trouble, and he jumps in and makes the company profitable again. So he's a good business head. When the two brothers left for Chicago, Cyrus stays home to take care of the estate. And that was in 1846. And then 1850, he would move to Chicago, and he spent, while William is managing the day-to-day operations, while Cyrus is pursuing patent infringement lawsuits, and Leander was running the product development. William would travel to Europe to promote the international sales. Now, this poor gentleman suffered from what's known as nervous dyspepsia, and he would end up dying in an asylum in 1865. So had a short life. His wife is a Mary Ann Grigsby, and together they would have three daughters of no note and a couple of sons that are worth talking about, and we'll get to. The last of those brothers was Leander McCormick. Bear with me. And basically, he was the business side of things. A few other McCormicks, but not worth mentioning. So, we'll go back up to Cyrus. Okay. Cyrus and Nettie. They have, how many children when they say they have? They had 7 children. And we start with Cyrus Hall McCormick Jr. Like I said, he merged the company to International Harvester. Interesting, one of the divisions of International Harvester would be sold to Dresser Industries in 1984. That was the Payline Construction Division. Dresser Industries, of course, was the employer of George H.W. Bush and would eventually become Halliburton. Yep. And that Payline Construction Company is the division that ended up doing all the work in Iraq.
Yep.
Small circle, huh?
Always.
So Cyrus grew up pretty wealthy, right? Inherited a huge business, and he, what do we know about him? Oh, he was a member of the Jekyll Island Club. Yeah. So
of course he was.
Yeah, and I believe it was Senator Aldrich stayed at his cabin when they created the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, his pictures, Cyrus McCormick Jr., his picture's hanging in the big building there on Jekyll Island.
Yeah, not surprising. So we're talking about some serious connections already. Agreed?
Yes.
Yeah, these guys came from the American dream. Farm family invents a device, turns it into a business, becomes a multinational business. Now they're part of the in crowd, and the rest is history. Now, throughout the 1860s, 1870s, this is the robber baron era and the Gilded Age. You don't hear a lot about the Chicago and the Cleveland and the Wisconsin mafias, but this is where organized crime starts. All right, so Cyrus was famous for his bitter fights with union workers. And there's a famous event called the Haymarket Massacre.
Yep.
You heard of it?
Yes.
Yeah, it was a peaceful rally. They were trying to strike for an 8-hour workday, heaven forbid. And somebody throws a dynamite bomb at the police. and about 7 police are killed in the blast. But it's not just police there, because what do these robber barons use to enforce their will? The Pinkerton agents and the Pinkerton detectives.
Yeah.
There was no FBI or CIA back then. You had the Pinkertons, and they occasionally worked for the government, but they usually worked for the robber barons.
Yep.
There were 300 Pinkerton agents there. 7 cops killed in the blast. Someone opens fire, kills at least 4 civilians. At least 50 to 100 people are injured. This event became one of the rallying points for global labor and happened on May 4th, which turned into May Day, which is the International Communist Day, or what have you. Interestingly, that 8 anarchists were wrongly accused and hung. 7 were hung, 1 got pardoned. The governor at the time was a guy by the name of Oglesby, who used to be a radical Republican, but he actually commuted a lot of the sentences. So, very, very big historical event that Cyrus was part of.
And let me just add, Pinkerton was involved in many of these types of labor disputes that all ended up with people dying on behalf of the oligarchs. And you notice what Warhamster just said. They labeled the people, the labor activists who were involved in labor disputes with a company, as they eventually label them as communist. And you see this cycle repeated in country after country after country during Operation Gladio. People who were being paid, as we saw in many of the instances in Latin America, like 86 cents a day for their labor. And the way that they overthrew the governments that were demanding these oligarchs to pay people a living wage. Doesn't that sound familiar? Isn't that what the whole thing is now? Pay them a living wage. Well, when they decided to co-opt the labor movement here and make it appear to be the model, then that allowed them to go into all these other countries and label anybody trying to do that, as they export the middle class jobs to all of these other countries around the world, communists, if they demanded the same thing that they supposedly eventually grant to American workers. So the labeling of them as communists and that kind of linkage started back then.
Yeah, and some of these, it's populism, and sometimes it's got a Marxist tint to it, and other times it's just, look, we want to get a fair wage. If you look what's going on in the 19th century in America, you've got the U.S. government giving all kinds of handouts to the robber barons, and they're creating factories with terrible working conditions. Basically, slavery ended. It was cheaper to have these immigrants working for like pennies on the day than it was to have to house a slave. So we didn't end slavery, we just shifted it.
Correct.
Completely changed the model. Sometimes it's Marxist flavor, and sometimes it's just people wanting to stand up for real life. And
correct.
I've talked about the political corruption that was going on there. You want to get a job at a factory as an immigrant, you have to go to the ward boss. And what the ward boss does, he hands out jobs to people who are going to vote the way he wants you to vote. And he's selling those votes to the local corrupt politicians. This is why we now have the secret ballot, because if they can't see who you're voting for, they can't extort you to vote. And that's kind of the way it works.
Where did you say this family originated from?
They're Scotland.
And do you know Pinkerton is too?
Yeah, let's leave Pinkerton. Let's leave Pinkerton hanging, because that's a big part of next week.
Okay.
We're going to go to a lot of depth there.
Yeah.
So
okay.
That's the teaser.
Okay.
Trust me, we're going to go deep into Pinkerton. All right. So let's switch over to Mary Virginia McCormick.
And I just want to draw the link before we do transition. You guys remember my model of how these companies had to pay for their private intelligence and paramilitary force. And then they offshooted after World War II into the CIA and the standing military in order to do their bidding around the world. What Warhamster is describing to you is the origins of that linkage up there, because these oligarchs had to pay Pinkerton to do this, and these are their higher jackboots on the ground to get their way, and they don't care how many people they kill to do it. And that cycle is exactly where we're at, because now they've privatized that, and we're back to us paying for the privatized Pinkertons of the world, which are all now owned by the same oligarchs. So he is explaining to you the initial steps of that model that I come up with. So go ahead.
Yeah, remember one of our earliest shows where we talked about how by 2007 or so in Iraq, we had more private contractors than we did people enlisted in Iraq. Yeah. All right. So why are we looking at Mary Virginia? Why does she deserve a Wikipedia entry? Born in 1861, 1941, very wealthy. She was a philanthropist. Remember, when we say philanthropist, it's air quotes 99% of the time.
Yeah.
They're using philanthropy to ensure their place in society, so they get access to the better deals, they get invited to all the right parties, et cetera, et cetera. That's what philanthropy is, and it's all about social status. But poor Mary, as wealthy as she is a schizophrenic. She tours Europe. Remember we had there was an uncle that was schizophrenic? We got a trend here.
Yeah.
She toured Europe most of her childhood and comes back to America in 1879, gets diagnosed with dementia precoce, and is declared insane and mentally incompetent. So someone else manages her trust. She'd become addicted to morphine, but she still lived at 80 years old and spent a ton of time all around. She moved to California. She lived in Canada, and gave really generously to some organizations we keep talking about over and over again. How about the YWCA and the YMCA? And then, of course, she held a huge event during World War I for the Canadian Red Cross.
Color me shocked.
Of course she did. All right, more trends here. Next McCormick is Robert McCormick III. 1863 to 1865, he died at the age of 2 from scarlet fever. Very sad. Anita Eugenie McCormick Blaine, 1866 to 1944, she was also a philanthropist. Now, she got into politics. She would found something called the New World Foundation. That's exactly what you think it is.
Yeah.
All right. She also helped found the new version of the Progressive Party in 1948. And I guess sponsors something called the National Guardian, which is a radical left periodical. So we always talk about the right. They like to cover both the right side and the left side of the political aisle because there really is no difference. But then you get these ideologues, and this woman was woke. But she married a guy by the name of Emmons Blaine, Blaine, and he is the son of two-time U.S. Secretary of State James G. Blaine, who served in 1881 for a few months, and then again from 1889 to 92. What do we say about secretaries of state? They are always someone connected.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, Blaine was a senator from Maine. I've actually been to his hometown. He's the leader of the House Republican caucus. Wait a minute. Isn't his daughter-in-law this big progressive lefty? Emmons Blaine was a big Lincoln supporter, but he was not a radical Republican. He was a hard money advocate and an ally of Ulysses S. Grant. The Grant administration was full of corruption and scandal, and we talked about that last week when we did the Roosevelts and the Delanos, remember?
Right.
Yeah, well, Blaine was part of that, and he sponsored something called the Blaine Amendment, which is supposed to distract from all the Grant scandals. As a senator, he sponsors this. And the big point of that, this doesn't pass, thank goodness, because he tried to put into writing the separation of church and state. And if I were to go back and read it right now, we'll do it on a constitutional show one day. It's a god-awful bill. Just leave it at that. But that's her father-in-law, and he's worth mentioning. We have an Alice McCormick. Did I skip over one? No. Alice died. Hang on. She lived for 1 year old, died in infancy. Stanley Robert McCormick lived for 97 years as a schizophrenic. You detecting a trend here?
Mm-hmm.
Then we get to Howard Fowler McCormick. He competed as a young man in the U.S. National Tennis Championships. Would become the chairman of International Harvester from 1935 to 41. He died in 41, so he died as a chairman. But in 1895, he marries a woman by the name of Edith Rockefeller McCormick. Should we leave that hanging there? It's a small circle.
Say it again.
This is Edith Rockefeller McCormick. She is the youngest daughter of none other than the founder of Standard Oil, John D. Rockefeller himself. Now, she gets treated for depression, again, mental illness, by none other than one of the fathers of psychiatry, Carl Jung, in Switzerland. She becomes one of the big supporters of Carl Jung. I think it's pronounced Carl Jung, even though it's pronounced Jung. When I took college philosophy, I took a class called Deviant Psychiatry, which is really interesting. I think they always pronounce it Jung. She kind of sponsored him to go basically be the shrink for all the rich and famous. And let's see how crazy was she. She believed in reincarnation and once ran around society claiming to be the first wife of King Tut. They just discovered his grave, and now all of a sudden she really believes she's reincarnated as the first wife of King Tut. So she's interesting. But Harold Fowler, because he marries into the Rockefeller family, he's actually the third inaugural trustee of the Rockefeller Foundation, where he would serve right next to a ton of bonesmen. He's also a trustee of the Rockefeller-created University of Chicago, which is where some of our worst economists in the world come out of, Milton Friedman being the exception. They would have 5 kids, none of real note. One died young of scarlet fever. So that's 3 in our family scarlet fever's gotten. One other bit of note is their 5th daughter was Miriam McCormick, married a guy by the name of Elisha Dyer Hubbard, who is the descendant of 2 Rhode Island governors. And we covered Rhode Island's corruption long ago in our series. And these 2 is scandalously divorced in 1921. Any comments?
He is also the second or third one you've covered that was part of, because I just want to say this because it goes into a theme here, that served either as president or an officer of a thing called Octave Chanute. And that, of course, is near and dear to my heart because my first duty station was Chanute Air Force Base. And that was a very prominent flying organization in the late 1800s that gave birth to aviation. And so this guy here served as its president, and you're seeing a theme with the Bonesmen that you just mentioned, and remember all of them being in flying clubs. Yeah. So there's another theme underneath there.
Yeah, in the efforts to be a little bit of brevity, I left out one of his failed business ventures. He'd try to set up a kind of a plane ferry service flying out of Chicago to different clubs across the Great Lakes. And remember, planes back then are really small, and the weather was just so unpredictable they couldn't make any money. So that was a failed business. But yes, indeed, good interjection.
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to make you dizzy again. I got to find William Sanderson again. There he is. William Sanderson, of course, married. Did I go? Okay, he marries Mary Ann Grigsby. And they have 5 kids. There's our oldest one. Actually, no, the first one we're going to do is this one, William Grigsby McCormick. He works as a banker and then sells insurance and real estate at his own companies. If you recall, his father, I believe, was there's Republicans and Democrats all over the family, agreed?
Yep.
And they're all in Chicago politics. So are they controlling both sides of everything?
Yes.
Perhaps. He becomes a alderman in Chicago, which is kind of a big position, as a Democrat in 1880. He would form an investment company called Smith, McCormick and Company. They traded commodities on the Chicago Board of Trade and then worked with the New York Stock Exchange. But they took a big hit in the Panic of 1893. McCormick's had some bad luck with the panics, but sometimes they rebuilt and sometimes they didn't. And he would just ride off into the sunset without doing anything all that interesting. But, all right, so Mary Ann and William Sanderson had 3 daughters of no note. But then the son that really keeps the line going, Robert Sanderson McCormick, born 1849 through 1919. He's born in Virginia but moves to Chicago as an infant. Invests in a St. Louis grain elevator business that crashed during the Panic of 1873. So, family's had some tough luck. Becomes a very politically active donor in the Republican Party. Didn't we just say his brother was a Democrat alderman?
Yep.
So he is a big donor. He gets the spoil system. The political class favors the donors. They give them rewards. And he basically gets a job in the State Department as a diplomat, where he goes straight to London, where he serves as the number 2 under a guy by the name of Robert Todd Lincoln, also known as the oldest son of Abraham Lincoln. McKinley's then president and makes him minister to Austria-Hungary in 1901. McKinley dies, assassinated in 1901. Teddy Roosevelt's president and makes him ambassador to Russia, and he's there during the Bloody Sunday protests. How many other people have we talked about that were in those exact same 2 places at that exact same period leading into World War I?
Yep.
He's then the ambassador to France from 1903 to 1905. And actually, I think maybe to 1907. But what's going on? I mean, that's a crazy place. That's a crazy place, series of places to be. And what do we say about the ambassadors? They're always someone who comes from these connected families because they can be trusted to carry out this U.S. foreign policy for the benefit of the wealthy elites. Shall I continue?
Yep.
All right. Yeah, we should do Grigsby next. Give me 1 second. I'm going to do Grigsby before we go on. I don't think, yeah. Bear with me. Okay, he's kept a Grigsby name from his mother. Oh, we already did him. Okay, good. Sorry, my order's a little off.
That's okay.
So Robert Sanderson, they have, okay, he marries Catherine Van Etta Medill. Medill is a pretty important family name. She is the daughter, she's born in 1853, the daughter of a Joseph Medill. He's a Republican politician and big backer of Republicans. and he owns and manages the Chicago Tribune.
Because of course he does.
Because you got to control the media, right?
Yep.
Back then, every big town had a Republican paper and a Democrat paper and maybe some others, but you didn't want to have two of each. And anyway, so he got a partner by the name of Cowles, and they had a big fight over the 1872 election, which I talked about just the other day on one of my other channels. We're going to talk. Well, this is one of the most disputed elections in history in 1872 between Hayes and Tilden. And if you think the 2020 election or the 2000 election fights were tough, this was just as bad. So he gets rid of his partner and turns the Tribune into a purely pro-Republican paper. Medill was a free soil and abolitionist, which makes him a radical Republican, big supporter of Abraham Lincoln. There's an interesting anecdote. He's arguing with Lincoln once the Civil War kicks in, whether they should have a draft in Illinois. And McGill didn't want it. And Lincoln comes back and chastises him pretty publicly. Said, look, Chicago and all of your politicians were the most uncompromising people in the whole Union against the South stance. You pick the fight, you're going to damn well fight it. So last week we talked about it with the Delanos. We talked about Grant's corrupt administration, and how he got forced to put together the first Civil Service Commission. Well, McGill's the guy who heads the first Civil Service Commission. And remember, they did nothing about the corruption that was going on with Delano.
Right.
So we've got a pretty, I'd say, guy who uses power a little bit. And of course, when after the Chicago fire, he becomes the mayor of Chicago in 1871. And what he does is he works very hard to give the position of mayor in Chicago more power than they would have previously, and something the mayors of Chicago have never relinquished in 150 years since. He made the mayor the presiding officer of the Chicago Common Council, so no separation between the executive and legislative. He gave the mayor the power to remove unelected city officials. The mayor gets to appoint all standing committees. You get to veto any ordinance, and you get to exercise in writing documented special police powers. And mayors of Chicago still have all of those powers to this day. So you want to talk about the political machine. You get a mayor with all these corrupt businessmen around you and get to wield pretty much autocratic rule in the city of Chicago. What do you think you're going to get?
Fascism.
And organized crime.
And organized crime.
Which we'll talk about more last week, but it came out of Kentucky and spread throughout the Midwest. And who else came out of Kentucky? Oh, I don't know, some log cabin guy by the name of Abe Lincoln. And who backed Lincoln? Oh, those same organized crime figures. All right. So that's now in the family. That's Medill. They have 3 children. And the first one is Medill McCormick. His name is Joseph Medill McCormick. He goes by his middle name. Born in 1877, right in the heart of the Gilded Age. Dies in 1925 at the age of 48. He gets educated at a place called the Groton School. Yeah, thought you might like that one. Goes to Yale and joins Scroll and Key. So that's the first guy we looked at, was Medill McCormick. He works as a publisher and becomes part owner of the Chicago Tribune. It's in the family business. He would purchase interests in the Cleveland Leader and the Cleveland News during yellow journalism's heyday. Have we talked about yellow journalism?
Yes.
You want to give a quick recap? You basically have Pulitzer. Yeah.
Go ahead.
You have Pulitzer and Hearst, William Randolph Hearst, are the 2 different publishers. And yellow journalism is sensationalist journalism, pretty much what we have today. It's fake news, and they're famous for trying to push the U.S. into war. absolute hysterical journalism, but this guy's involved in that in Cleveland. Please add on to that, because there's a lot more to.
Well, I mean, it's just anytime that you're going to have these expansionist agendas and do the imperialist thing, you have to be able to control the domestic media and fill it full of propaganda to support whatever it is that you're going to be doing next.
Yep. And the Pulitzer brawl with Hearst was one for the ages. It's taught in journalism school quite a bit. Pulitzer was big in New York. Hearst was big in the West Coast. He came to New York, tried to take on Pulitzer in his own backyard, and God, it was just one of the ugliest fights in media history. But this guy's involved in all that, whether it's Cleveland. So in 1901, this guy, born with a silver spoon in his mouth, working for a paper that his family owns, becomes a war correspondent in 1901 in a place that shows up every single show, called the Philippines.
And what were we doing in the Philippines during that time?
Oh, we just stolen it from the Spanish in the war of the Spanish-American War in 1898.
And did we free the Philippines people once we won the Spanish-American War?
Well, I think it all depends on what the meaning of is. Yeah.
No. We sent in troops to quell the freedom fighters that were fighting for decades before that in the Philippines, and basically massacred them and put in our own governor so that we could perpetuate the colonialization just under a different flag.
Indeed. So in 1903, he comes back and takes over the full-time management of the Chicago Tribune, which is now one of the biggest newspapers in the country. And obviously very, very influential in Republican circles. But Medill becomes depressed and an alcoholic. Wait, have we seen that before in this family? So, of course, he gets help from none other than Carl Jung, the same person who helped his aunt. And Carl Jung's advice was for him to detach himself from the newspaper, which he does, and his brother, who we'll get to, takes over the newspaper from there. He gets into politics instead, because that's really relaxing compared to the newspaper, and becomes, in 1912, and he becomes chair of the National Progressive Movement. The National Progressive Republican Movement in 1912 to 1914. This is the heyday of the progressive era. We talked about Teddy Roosevelt beginning the progressive era.
Right.
Now, they're really pushing these progressive stuff. When I say progressive, this is the stuff that we're fighting back to this day. Big government, all the woke stuff, that's what these guys are into. Our establishments, the ones who influence all our universities, are already singing this tune. The progressives would just get destroyed in the 1920 election because their policies were so terrible that they didn't call themselves progressives again for about another 90 years when Obama came in. But their philosophies never changed. They just started calling themselves Democrats, or liberals is the word they used. Medill gets elected to the U.S. House of Representatives from 1917 to 19, and then he gets elected to the U.S. Senate from 1918. He loses re-election. Oh, he's on a bunch of labor committees, which is interesting.
So you can influence the labor as far as control instead of having to have your Pinkerton thugs go in.
In the 20th century, there'd been a little bit of reform. The Pinkertons were a little less necessary for the union bashing, but they still did. So he loses his election in 1924 and basically committed suicide and dies in 1925 while he was still in office. And that's why he died so young. His wife is Ruth Hanna McCormick. You recognize that middle name?
Yeah, where do I recognize it from?
Well, we're going to close with that, so leave it alone for now. Just keep it in your head.
Okay.
Because Ruth is a very interesting woman. Born 1880 to 1944, she joins the Progressive Party in 1912 and supported Teddy Roosevelt the Republican, who ran as the Progressive Party, not the Bull Moose Party. We talked about that last week.
Yep.
She is a very wealthy and big woman suffragist. Huge muscle behind the 19th Amendment. Then she becomes a woman serving in the House of Representatives in 1928. And that's pretty unique. She wasn't the first, but one of the very few. Wins the Republican primary and becomes the first woman Senate candidate for a major party, but she lost the general to a Democrat. She would stay in politics until, well, she actually was the campaign manager for Thomas Dewey in 1940. He did not win the party nomination, but that was a pretty prominent position for her. So that's Medill McCormick and his wife, Ruth. Pretty impressive woman, though, huh?
Yeah.
Next, we have Katrina McCormick. You probably haven't heard of her because she died in infancy. Then we get to Robert. Real name, Robert Rutherford McCormick, mostly known to everybody as the Colonel. Colonel McCormick. But when he's a kid, how many Roberts have we had in his family?
A lot.
So they started calling him Birdie. That's probably why he wanted to be called Colonel, because Birdie's a strange sounding name. He's born, and this is a name that more people should know. He's born in 1880 to 1955. He attends a school in London when he's younger called the Ludgrove School. And why did I give it a German accent? Ludgrove School. And of course, he graduates from a place called the Groton School. Goes to Yale with his brother 3 years behind and goes to Scroll and Key. Goes to Northwestern Law School in Illinois. 1904, he becomes a Republican alderman in Chicago. Then he becomes the president of the board of the Chicago Sanitary District. It's like 24 years old. And what are you doing in the Chicago Sanitary District? This is mob activity. These are like the Teamsters, all that stuff. These are the early organized crime working with labor. And he's overseeing it at the city level. I can guarantee you there are cash payments going on everywhere. This is dirty Chicago, the political machine, and this guy's right there in the middle of it. But he's not all bad. It's just an interesting position for a 23-year-old guy to have. Agree?
As a lawyer, yeah. I mean, never mind. Go ahead.
Yeah, we just know how this works with the political machine if you've been paying attention.
Yes. Yeah. You don't grow up to want to be in charge of the sanitary thing, so there's a lot more going on there.
Uh-huh. And of course, you got a family business interest all over the state, multiple industries. I'm sure they probably have some kind of sanitation company or contracts they're giving out, while his other relatives are aldermen and mayors and all that sort of thing. So yeah, that's kind of how the game works. That's why I called today's a political machine, because you can just see it right in front of you. So he goes on to co-found a law firm that eventually becomes called Kirkland Ellis. Sound familiar?
Yes, we've come across them quite a bit.
Yeah, some notable alumni: Robert Bork, Brett Kavanaugh. Oh, I don't know, two-time Attorney General Bill Barr.
Yep.
But it was also Kirkland Ellis was the law firm that represented somebody we've heard in the news a few times by the name of Jeffrey Epstein. And they're the ones who negotiated the plea deal in Florida with Alex Acosta.
Yep.
Pretty cool. But he was long gone, so we can't blame that on him. I just like tracing these law firms. This is one of the top 10 blue blood law firms, no matter how you measure it. This is the guy who co-founded it. Pretty powerful man.
That's crazy.
Yeah. When his brother got depressed, he got involved in a family publishing business. World War I breaks out. He goes over to Europe in 1915 as a war correspondent who would interview some dignitaries like, I don't know, Tsar Nicholas himself. Also, Winston Churchill. Family connections help, huh?
Well, and keep in mind, when we use the word war correspondent, we're not actually talking about journalism. They're generally there for intelligence purposes.
Funny you would say that. So he comes back from his correspondence mission, joins the Illinois National Guard in 1916. Because this guy grew up at country clubs, he's a cavalryman. He's a very good horseman. And like all the sons of the elite, doesn't get deployed right away. He actually served at the Mexican border of all places in 1916. 1917, he gets sent to France as an intelligence officer.
Oh, color me shocked.
Have we seen this pattern before?
Yes, we have. Repeatedly.
I love it when you guess this stuff ahead of time. It makes it a little pattern recognition. He actually did see some real action, and he was in the field artillery division and became a colonel. So that's why they call him the colonel. He actually earned his rank. So good for him. He comes back after the war, and he co-sponsors something that's around to this day, the Joseph Medill School of Journalism, named after his paternal grandfather. Yeah. And that's still a school of journalism to this day.
Journalism. From the war correspondent / intel officer.
Yeah. My grandfather, who was not intelligence, was a naval correspondent journalist in World War II in the Pacific. But I do understand the difference between the two. All right, so he's a Republican, of course. And we get to the 1930s. Now, he is vehemently opposed to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Wait a minute, didn't we just talk about the Delano family and how they have ties to Scroll and Key?
Yes, we did.
And this guy's a Scroll, yeah. He's basically 8 years after a Delano. But remember, the Roosevelts were split between Republicans and Democrats, allegedly.
Just like these guys are.
Oh, are we detecting another pattern? I hear he does some things that I really like. Well, I kind of like. As a Republican, he compares the New Deal to communism.
Which it 100% was.
Yes. Yes. You know, the colonel talks about how we go after any populist movement and call them communists. That is not to say that there aren't real communists in the world, because they are. There are. And communism sucks when it gets implemented. All right, so here's some of his.
I would refer to the New Deal as socialism, but the point still stands.
Yeah, but socialism is also just a step, but it's a slow road towards communism.
Yeah, it's the government control.
Yeah, it's the soft version of the communism is about violent overthrow. Socialism about the soft, slow march through the institutions.
Correct.
They both suck.
Yes.
So did Lincolnian republicanism. So, because that was also about big government. All right, so this guy has a reputation. As he's running this paper, the Chicago Tribune, he's got a lot of political power, and he's writing editorials. And now he was called, get this, an American First non-interventionist. Starting to like him a little?
Well, I know a lot about the original America First movement, and it wasn't the same as the America First movement today.
Well, let's talk about some of his views. He opposed entry into World War II because he did not want to, in quotes, rescue the British Empire. All right, I can agree with that. He published, FDR had something called the Victory Program, which was a memo talking about how we would win the war if we entered it. At the time, entry into World War II was not popular. This paper gets leaked to him by Republican Senator Burton K. Wheeler, and it's explosive. The FDR is making plans to go to a war that nobody wants. Well, 3 days later, Pearl Harbor happens, and the hubbub dies down really quickly, and everyone wants to go to war. So he was an anti-war guy, but interesting. June of 42, he's the guy that published that the United States had broken the Japanese codes. And then we found out when they did and realized that FDR knew that the Japanese were coming.
Right.
You want to relitigate that again, or can we move on?
No, I think we can keep going.
Okay. So then you go out and purchase a radio station that became a TV station that you may have heard of called WGN in Chicago. You heard you know that one, right? It's where you watch the Cubs games.
Yeah.
You know what it stands for?
What?
WGN? World's Greatest Newspaper. Yeah, I like that. All right, so he would spend the rest of his career going on all kinds of political crusades. And let's give you a list of all the people he had crusades in his paper against. Well, politicians of all size, gangsters and racketeers, labor unions, prohibition, Wall Street, pretty much anyone from the East, the East Coast Blue Buds, Democrats, the New Deal, the Fair Deal, liberal Republicans, the League of Nations, the World Court, the United Nations, British imperialism, socialism, communism, Chicago Mayor William Hale Thompson, and of course, Illinois Governor Len Small. So we got a bit of a maverick on our hands, don't we?
I'm still stuck on the America First thing.
Go for it.
My research into it, if you look at the origins of the America First, it was actually set up by a Yale Law School graduate. Did you know that?
I did not.
Okay. R. Douglas Stewart Jr. And he was the heir to the Quaker Oats Company. And it was also, he put a guy by the name of Robert E. Wood in charge. And for those of you who follow me, he's the guy that was the chairman of the Sears Roebuck Company. He also ran a private intelligence office out of Chicago that had like hundreds of women clipping newspapers and creating personal files on everyone. So anybody that they needed to run dirt stories on, they just called the Sears Roebuck guy, and he provided them all the dirt to trash them. And it was also involved in the hosting of the what was characterized as the Nazi sympathizing rally at Madison Square Gardens in New York City. So that's why I say it's not the same America First as what we know today. It was very much while they say that they were against the British Empire, which we all are, their actions back then were, I wouldn't classify them as pro-support of Hitler, but it's very much involved in intelligence and all kinds of other things. It was like a secret arm that enabled certain agendas.
To me, the best version of the America First concept was Monroe and the Monroe Doctrine. So Europe, stay the hell out of our hemisphere, and we're going to stay out of yours. That's, we can trade, but knock it off with his adventurism. Then, of course, America couldn't resist the temptation. When we became a superpower, we had to get into our own adventurism, but that's the story we've been telling for 3 years.
And use the Monroe Doctrine to justify overturning governments in Latin America.
Yep, the Banana Republic became straight out 100% correct.
Yep.
All right, what else did Robert do? 1948, he would purchase a paper called the Washington Times-Herald after the death of one of his cousins, one of the Medills. He appoints his niece named Basie McCormick, who is the daughter of Ruth Hanna and Medill, points her to run it, but apparently the people there didn't understand what the person running it was supposed to actually be running it, so there was a power struggle. She quits. the colonel goes over there, and not you, this guy.
The other colonel.
The other colonel, there's only two of you. He tries to run the place, but lost money and ends up selling it to a place called the Washington Post in 1954. Robert would die childless in 1955. But interesting man. Okay. We are a little bit ahead of schedule, so we're going to be able to do the full in-depth story on this next guy.
Okay.
So Ruth Hanna McCormick leads into one of my favorite guys, Mark Hanna. That's her father. He's born in 1837, and died in 1904. He's born in New Lisbon, Ohio, but quickly moved to Cleveland. We talked about these power brokers. Who else is from Cleveland? Oh, the Rockefellers. And we got the Chicago people. And this is the power base of the new industrial breed, not the East Coast, but the new industrial robber barons. So he goes to high school in Cleveland, and his classmate and lifelong friend was a guy by the name of, John D. Rockefeller. Yeah. How many times do we say all roads lead to Rockefeller?
Yeah.
I want you to keep that relationship in mind as we tell his story. And think about, what did the Rockefellers have any say in what he did? He actually got expelled from college for a prank, something stupid. Serves briefly in the Civil War. Marries a woman named Charlotte Rhodes in 1864. He'd been courting her for about a year and a half. Her father didn't like him because father had supported Stephen Douglas in the Illinois governor's race, and Mark Hanna had supported Abraham Lincoln. Father eventually comes around and gives him the blessing. Hanna goes out and tries a couple of businesses. He's got a failed refinery. Opens up an oil refinery, and somehow it gets burned to the ground. Now, there is no indication that that was one of the refineries that Rockefeller burned down to kill the competition, but it's a data point. He also tried a steamer business. That one sank to the bottom of the Great Lakes. So Charlotte, his wife's father, takes him into the business, and Hanna, it's a pretty sharp guy, soon becomes a partner. And his father's business, his father-in-law's business, had many interests, mostly coal and iron, which is huge in the 1860s. Remember, everything's expanding west. They're building railroads, towns, factories. You need coal, you need iron. They're making money. So by the age of 40, Mark Hanna is a millionaire. And he decides to get to politics. So in 1868, he puts his support for president behind Ulysses S. Grant. General Grant, we've already talked about how corrupt his government was. But the reason Hanna supports him is because they're still printing greenbacks, which is basically fiat currency, which they used to finance the Civil War. Small pause. I've talked about this before, but there's a theory out there that 1871 the United States became incorporated and became owned by the City of London, the Vatican, and Wall Street banks because the United States had too much war debt in the Civil War. That's the theory. This did not happen. What happened in the Civil War, the War of Northern Aggression, the European banks wanted to lend money to the Union and charge over 30% interest. Well, that wasn't going to happen. So Lincoln's Secretary of the Treasury, guy by the name of, I will get into him later, Chase, Solomon P. Chase, the namesake for Chase Manhattan Bank, and we need to talk about him later. Maybe we'll do it next week. Created this idea called the greenbacks, where we summon money out of thin air. The problem with that, and the reason Hanna is supporting Grant, is the greenbacks were going for about 35 cents on the dollar with his trade with Canada. Canada's not honoring the greenback. So he's hoping that Grant would stabilize currency. For these next few decades, the whole currency battle is everything from free silver to gold standard, all that. It's a huge issue. It's a whole show in and of itself, but this is a big deal. If you only have a gold standard, there's not enough money supply. And so the wealth doesn't spread down to the people. So a lot of the populists wanted to have silver be convertible to as a convertible currency, which would increase the money supply and help money trickle down. That's the theory behind it. So in the 1880s, Hanna buys the Cleveland Herald newspaper. Remember that guy, Edwin Cowles? Cowles, who was getting in the fight with McCormick over the newspaper?
Yep.
He does not like having another newspaper in town. There's only room for one Republican newspaper in town, and Cowles owns the Cleveland Leader. So he would viciously attack in his paper Hanna for 5 years until Hanna finally sold the business. And this really began the negative image of Hanna in the press, which he would get bad press the rest of his career, the rest of his life. So we're 1880. And Hanna starts becoming the Republican Kingmaker. And he really had that reputation, and he deserved it. The Republican nominee in 1880 was James Garfield. How that happened was interesting. Garfield's an Ohio rep. This Ohio political mafia wants someone from Ohio, to be the president of the United States. That's a big deal to them. So the person they sent to the Republican convention was the current Secretary of the Treasury by the name of a guy from Ohio, John Sherman. It's a name to remember. There's John. Unfortunately, Sherman didn't do too well at the convention, and Garfield made such a compelling speech. He ends up getting the nomination, even though his name wasn't on the ballot. So Hanna, who was not at the convention, gets really active in the campaign and fundraises all over the country. There's all the Republican donors all up and down the eastern seaboard. And there's different camps in the Republican Party. There's the New York camp, and there's the Midwest camp, and there's the Southern camp, although they don't really carry any votes. It matters at the convention. And Hanna basically pays, very effective at fundraising, pays for all of Garfield's personal expenses in what's called the Front Porch Campaign. And Garfield wins, and most of the people say Hanna is responsible for getting Garfield to win, mostly by convincing Ulysses Grant to support him, because Grant was the war hero. So, Kingmaker, right? Well, Hanna would meet another guy from Ohio around 1876 or so. That guy's name is William McKinley. They were very friendly. McKinley had a reputation of being an extremely nice guy, but also more honest than most of the politicians. He did not want to do the pay-to-play stuff as much. He wasn't totally innocent of it, but... So Hanna had tried, like in 1888 and 92, to get John Sherman, who's now a senator in Ohio, tried to get him to get the Republican nomination, but it just didn't happen. And as hard as Hanna tried, and as good as he was at glad-handing, he couldn't get it done. So in 1896, he realizes Sherman's getting older. He's like 73 years old. He's not going to win a presidency. So he decides he's going to back McKinley, and they start planning for this several years in advance. During the campaign, the big thing on the debate was American intervention in Cuba, because the Cubans are rebelling against Spain. Now, Colonel, it's not just the Cubans expelling. We're doing a regime change all around Central and South America already. This is the just the early stages of it's probably the second inning. This guy named Teddy Roosevelt, who's well-known Republican from a big, well-known Republican family, which we talked about last week. Hanna's at the Gridiron Dinner, which is where the Republicans kind of introduced their potential candidates. Teddy Roosevelt famously shakes his fist under Hanna's nose and says, "We will have this war for freedom in Cuba in spite of the timidity of the commercial classes." What do you think about that statement?
It's consistent with the Roosevelt Delano line of thinking.
Yeah. But the problem is the commercial classes, as you and I well know, want intervention in Central and South America.
Yes.
So there's more on this. There's a reason we finished with this, because it really, well, it kind of puts some icing on the cake of a lot of our stories. So what Hanna does next is he gets Sherman named the Secretary of State under McKinley, who wins in 1896. Hanna then steps into the vacant role in the U.S. Senate. So what do we say about Secretaries of State? They've always been controlled? Pretty consistent?
Yep.
Well, Sherman's interesting because he actually wanted intervention in Cuba, and McKinley completely ignores him. McKinley was tried to stay out of the war. And by 2 years in, Sherman resigns from as being Secretary of State and is replaced by William R. Day, who's supposed to be on McKinley's side about staying out of the war. And then we get the sinking of the U.S. Maine in Havana Bay. Was that a false flag?
Yes, it was.
You want to tell the story real quick?
Well, I mean, I'm not in depth, but basically there's an explosion, and it is kind of the rallying flag now, with looking back, for the concept of, Operation Northwood and all of that stuff. Because when you can have something that kills a whole bunch of people, which it did, and it's a debacle, but it was the impetus to get us into the Spanish-American War. It was the false flag that got us into the Spanish-American War.
Yeah, and pretty much most historians now agree that it was a false flag. That
Yes.
there was an investigation, and they found no signs that the Spanish had actually done that. Now, we didn't have video surveillance back there. Not that does us any good. Apparently, we can't even solve assassinations with all the video. But whatever. Sorry, did I get political?
Yeah.
Or conspiratorial? All right. So now we got the war. Hanna would support McKinley's decision. Okay, after the war, which we win very easily. Hanna supports McKinley's decision to annex Puerto Rico and Guam, which means make them U.S. territories permanently, which they didn't do in a lot of the other Spanish territories. We get to 1899, and McKinley's vice president, a guy by the name of Hobart, dies. McKinley does not name a new VP. He wants to let the Republican convention decide that when he runs for re-election in 1900. As we've talked about last week, Teddy Roosevelt had gone over in Cuba and led his Rough Riders, and had all kinds of media coverage for that, and became a rising star, and immediately became a very young Republican governor of New York State. And he's been in there for less than 2 years, and the convention makes him the obvious choice for vice president in the 1900 election, where they beat William Jennings Bryan, who was a populist running on the free silver the free silver platform. McKinley gets shot by an anarchist by the name of Leon Kolgos. It's kind of hard to pronounce. I don't know how to pronounce it. It's like a Polish or Czech name. In 1901, McKinley's dead. As he's dying, he asked the doctors, "Is Mark Hanna, is Mark here?" And he was. And he held his hand. McKinley, he was pretty weak. Couldn't tell he was there. Doctors say McKinley's starting to stabilize. So Hanna goes off to a scheduled appearance at one of the nearby forts. And while he's gone, McKinley passes away. So Roosevelt immediately reaches out to Hanna to mend bridges between them, because they'd had some political differences. And, well, they kind of mended the bridges. So Hanna, here we are in 1901, 1902, And he becomes a big supporter of this thing called the Panama Canal.
You mean not the, what was it, the Nicaraguan canal?
Yeah, here's how he would put up maps. They did postage stamps showing, they talked about all the volcanoes they had in Nicaragua.
None of which was near the canal.
They tried to scare everyone away from the Nicaraguan canal.
They mailed them stamps to every single senator to scare them. It was a propaganda campaign originated by a PR company in order to facilitate who? Sullivan and Cromwell's representation, John Foster Dulles, who was representing the failed bankrupt French company that started the Panama Canal. Yeah, nothing to see here.
And Hanna is the senator leading the charge. So, of course, in 1903, Panama breaks away from Colombia,
No, Panama was stolen from Colombia, thanks to our U.S. Navy.
Yes, indeed.
And another false flag.
There were rumors that Hanna was going to challenge Teddy Roosevelt in 1904, but his health failed, and so that wasn't going to happen. Hanna was a big deal. Interestingly, the treaty to ratify the Canal Zone was signed 8 days after Hanna's death in 1904.
That's crazy.
He left one hell of a legacy, didn't he?
Yes, he did. That's crazy.
Teddy Roosevelt's biographer, we've talked about him before, Edmund Morris, has the following quote about Hanna's achievement in industry and politics. He says, "He had not done badly in either field. He had made $7 million and a president of the United States."
That's crazy.
That's all I have for today.
That's a bang-up job. That's quite a story. Quite a family.
Yeah, we got, what do we get? Chicago mob politics, yellow journalism, American adventurism in South and Central America and Philippines. Got to bring that back in. We got Rockefeller connections, because we always do. And
Roosevelt, Delano connections.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So what do you think about Scroll and Key right about now?
Well, contrary to you, I was leery of them from the beginning only because I know that there's that middle Praetorian Guard necessary in order for the Skull and Bone guys to carry out their thing. And it was very clear to me in your presentations that they were fielding the operational control element. So you have the strategic level, they have to have an operational level with the academics and all of that other stuff. And you remember the very first show on Skull and Keys, I'm like, I'm not seeing the good side of this, because it to me looked like they were rolling out the operational level of the Praetorian Guard. And so I think we've proven that unequivocally at this point.
Well, next week we're going to stay the same time period because it's really important. I think that period of American history is not taught properly. We're taught that, oh, the Gilded Age was great. Hell no, it wasn't. Everything wrong with our country and our politics and our government and our corporations today, we can trace back to the period of 1850 to 1900.
Absolutely.
And that's why I'm hammering this point home. And sorry, a lot of you grew up thinking Abraham Lincoln was a great president. Before I'm done, I will have made my case that he is not. And again, it goes back.
Reagan, we lived through Reagan and everybody thought he was one. So it is very easy to fool the masses because he was not a great president.
Yeah.
Because they control the media, as you just illustrated.
Do I have it here? And if you want to talk about the election of 1860, this is the book to get. It talks about how the four different factions and what they actually cared about. And the Republicans, the radical Republicans, about abolition was very low on their totem pole. The two things they cared about most were federally, this is verbatim, word for word, federally funded internal improvements and protective tariffs. And both of those favor their big established businesses and the crony capitalists. And that's how the robber barons got where they are today. And once they got entrenched, they started buying out the institutions that they created. And that is the problem. And that is why I cannot stand Abraham Lincoln and the false history we've been taught about him. And has nothing to do with the fact that slavery is an absolute abomination. And that was great to get rid of it. The free soil abolitionists, they did want to end slavery, but they also wanted to get rid of every black in America. They didn't want to share soil with them. That's why they called it free soil. So,
well, and that was clearly articulated by them going to Africa and creating Liberia.
And we got I don't know, few dozen quotes of Lincoln saying exactly that. My favorite is his letter to Horace Greeley, which we may get to next week because it's an important one.
Well, I think that kind of brings us right back to kind of where we started. That was an awesome presentation.
I know I probably didn't pause as often as I normally do to let you get your 2 or 3 cents in, but I had a lot to get through, so I apologize for talking.
No. It's perfect. The little punctuation points along the way, I think, just seals the deal by taking all of the information that you presented and being able to overlay it in, obviously my specialty is around the 1900s forward. And so you are laying the bedrock for everything that I've presented. So I think it's awesome.
Agreed. Well, thank you so much for putting up with me for another show.
You're welcome. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. I appreciate you guys taking time out of your day and learning real history as opposed to what we were presented from yellow journalism. And you can see in this show, probably better than any of the shows we've done, that controlling the media, and primarily at this point, obviously, it's print media. These are the same families. Again, it's the Praetorian Guard. And he laid it out so well for us today that what we know about history is filtered through these same people. So you have to keep in mind that these families control most of what we know about today. There are some people that have went far beyond, as Warhamster just said, and going back and presenting real history. But most of our history has been generated through more of a controlled mechanism as opposed to real information.
Well said. Agreed.
Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.
Cheers, everyone.